of all, let's just talk about where we are right now and what you're doing in Vegas, and then we're going to go back and talk a little bit about you as a stage manager.
Oh, so. Sounds great. Okay. Do you want me to like introduce myself or?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Louise Wardle. I'm a stage manager. I live here in beautiful, sunny Las Vegas. I currently work on call for 3 different shows here. Absinthe, which is a Spiegelworld show, Magic Mike by Base Entertainment, and Love, Cirque du Soleil show. I moved here in March 2018 and have been living and working here ever since.
And where are you from?
I'm originally from Perth, Western Australia.
And what was your trajectory to get to Las Vegas?
Oh my gosh, it was completely and utterly unplanned. I could not have imagined I would be here in a million years. In 2017, I won the US green card lottery and decided to pursue that because how often do you get the chance to work and live in the US? So it took about a year for that to come through, and then we moved here in 2018. Like I said, completely unplanned, but very pleasant surprise, and I've really enjoyed every moment of it, to be honest. It's been great.
No, great. So tell me, why stage management? How did you get into stage management and why?
Okay. Well, I think it started way back in high school. I've always loved working on any dance, drama, theatre show that we put on at school. And at that stage I was more interested in performing, but the older I got, the more I realised that sort of was a big fish in a small pond in high school, but outside of that world I wasn't perhaps as talented as other people, and realised that I wanted to keep working in the industry, that theatre was really my passion. And one day we were doing like a career counselling thing at school, and I literally opened up the book to performing arts and I found stage management written there in the careers guide, and I was like, that's it, that's what I want to do. The little bio sounded great. I thought I could, I thought I could do it. So I was like, all right. And that was also saying that the course was offered at the West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, which was in my hometown. So I thought that would be a great, university to aim for. It wouldn't involve me having to move anywhere, so it was quite an achievable goal. Mm-hmm. And that's basically it. I sort of just followed that and really enjoyed it. Yeah.
And so when you after you did your course, how did you get your first work job? How did you get started working?
It was difficult. I finished my 3 years at WAPA and wasn't really sure, how do you get a job? It's not like you can jump on Seek and find it listed there. You sort of need to make the connections. My first goal when I finished university was actually to travel. I'd been dying to travel for the 3 years that I was there. So the first thing I did was I signed myself up to work at a summer camp, at a theatre summer camp in the US. So I went and did that for 3 months, and then I came back and I was like, now what? Now I need to find that first job, and it didn't happen. I kept asking people and looking around for work, and was kind of waiting and working in retail in the interim for like 3 months, I think it was, before I finally got a phone call from somebody who I went to university with, who was like, there's a little tour going around Western Australia. Do you think it's something you might like to do? And absolutely it was. So I said yes, and that just snowballed. One job rolled into the other, and the next thing I had full-time freelance work as a stage manager.
So do you think it's about landing that first opportunity?
Absolutely,
really?
And networking.
Yeah.
Absolutely, networking is a huge one. Landing your first opportunity, going into it with a lot of passion and being dedicated and making a good impression on that first job is really important, because that's what will get you your second job. And also networking, because like I said, you don't find the jobs advertised on a website somewhere. You really need to know who to ask to find the opportunities.
And skill-wise, did you feel that you were ready for that first job coming out of university?
Absolutely not. No way. Hindsight's such a beautiful thing. I actually felt like after finishing that first job that I wished I took a gap year between finishing high school and going to university, because I realized just how little I knew about the world and just how unprepared I was in those soft skills as a stage manager. You can make a schedule, you can make a prompt copy, but if you don't know how to talk to people and relate to people when there's issues, you're going to struggle. And that's what I struggled with as a 22-year-old, you know, fresh out of university. That was what was hard for me. Yeah.
Do you think that then is an aspect of the education in your university years that could be improved upon in the people management? Because essentially stage management, that's 99% of that job.
Yep, and you can't learn those skills. Some people may never learn those skills. Some people are better at them, naturally more talented, and other people can get there with coaching. It's definitely a huge part of stage management that perhaps is overlooked in sort of the education these days. You know, I know that we did things like personality testing and this sort of thing, and that's interesting to help you learn a little bit more about yourself, but it still doesn't help you to learn how to deal with other people. A slight sort of, you know, psychology aspect would be incredibly beneficial, I think. At
least even if you're a young person,
especially
that you have, you may not have the experience, but at least you have some tools to know that that's a big factor in the job. You know, because I actually feel the same about it. I was totally unprepared. So when you're in Perth and everything but now I would say that you are an international stage manager. So you applied for the green card from Australia, or?
I applied for the green card when I was living in Macau. I had applied for it the year before. That was when I was still in Australia. The first year I applied, I was still in Australia. The second year I applied, I was living in Macau. Yeah, and I got it on the second go.
And your motivation to apply for the green card was because you wanted to live in the US, or?
I'm a complete and utter opportunist. If somebody offers me an opportunity to do something, I have a really hard time saying no. And I think I love opening myself up for any sort of opportunities. Like I said, I never ever thought I'd win. So for me, the attitude was more like, well, what's the harm in entering if you're not going to win, right? And then complete shock to have found out that I won it the second time. But because I put my name forward for that opportunity, I really felt like I couldn't say no. That was something that I needed to grab with both hands, because I probably would never have had that opportunity otherwise. Yeah.
And what would you say are the major differences between working as a stage manager in Australia and working as a stage manager in the US?
It's interesting. There's some obvious differences and some not so obvious differences. One thing that I really like about working as a stage manager here in the US, and this is particularly relevant to Vegas, is I have the opportunity to work as an on-call or a freelance stage manager here on really large-scale productions that in Australia an on-call position would never exist. You would either be one of the full-time team or you wouldn't be working on the show at all. Whereas here I've had the opportunity to work on different shows and go between the different shows as needed. And that was really interesting to me. I also felt like there's more opportunity here in the US. Having worked in Australia in the industry for, at least 5 years, after those 5 years, I felt like I'd done everything. Like I'd sort of reached the ceiling, you know, there wasn't a lot that I could have done to have gotten further that didn't involve me leaving Perth.
Right.
And here in the US, I feel like there's a lot more opportunity. That's mainly due to the size of the US compared to Australia. I mean, it's huge. There's so many more shows going on here, so many more opportunities that I can try here compared to in Australia. But, you know, compared to Perth, which was a population of 2 million, very small. In terms of working as a stage manager, fundamentally it's the same thing. I think the differences come more through the culture. I think we're perhaps a little more laid back in Australia, a bit more you know, just working with your mates, that sort of thing. It feels very, a bit more, I want to say professional, but it's professional in Australia too. I think that you just have more of a work relationship between, you know, stage manager and cast here in the US. Thinking of so many things. Because comparing that to the House of Dancing Water, it was completely different again, where people did tend to have more friendship between, you know, cast and crew. But yeah, fundamentally, I think I would say it's like, as a stage manager, the responsibilities that you have, you know, in Australia versus the US are the same. Just more opportunities over here, I would say.
And so we kind of skipped over that. You were in Australia, and then you worked in Macau, and then you went to
the US.
Came to the US. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason, before we get back to Macau, is there a reason you chose Vegas over, say, New York City, or?
Yes, and very boring, realistic reason is that my money would have got me a lot further in Vegas than it would have in New York City. I would love to live there. I would just love to have that opportunity, but it's a very expensive place to live. I also had a lot of connections through the circus industry here in Vegas. A lot more people who I could call on to help me, and who did help me, were a wonderful support network for me when I moved here that I don't have in New York. I think I made the right choice coming to Vegas because I landed on my feet fairly quickly, which was great.
Yeah. And so you were a stage manager in Macau, and tell us about that.
I was a stage manager in Macau at the House of Dancing Water for 2 years. I actually was, I'll tell you about how I first discovered the show. I was on holiday in Hong Kong, and I had a friend of a friend, Liz Webster, working on the show. And our mutual friend said, Lou, you have to go and see this show while you're in Hong Kong. It's phenomenal. And I thought, no, I don't want to. I really don't want to go and watch more theatre or more shows while I'm on holiday. Like, I want to get away from that. And she was very insistent. She said, no, you really have to go and see this show. I think you'll really enjoy it. So I looked it up online and went, okay, that looks kind of different and exciting. I haven't seen anything like that before. So I went across to Macau for the evening to see the show. And Liz had arranged for us to sit in the booth so we could listen to the show call. And I literally had to pick myself up off the floor at the end. I'd never seen anything like it. And it just blew my mind in terms of what I was seeing, what was in the realm of possibilities for theatre, circus, arts. I just thought it was incredible. And I turned to my husband at the end and said, I will work on this show. It took a couple of years, but I got there.
There you go. And so how did you land the job there?
I reached out to Liz and I asked her if she wouldn't mind passing on my CV. And she did. And I thought she did. We didn't particularly know each other very well. And I thought, well, even if she doesn't, and, you know, she just, you know, deletes it or whatever, it doesn't matter because at least I've tried. And she did pass it on, and the GSM did get in touch with me not too long after that. And again, goes back to networking, who you know in the industry. So having that one little network there really opened a door for me.
Even internationally,
Even
right?
internationally, it just takes one person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you called that show?
Yes.
And so you've probably worked on a number of different scales of show calling. What would you say to people who are getting started in terms of show calling, like how to scale as a show caller? How do you improve that skill set as one of the hard skill sets of stage management?
How do you improve it? Well, I guess the biggest thing is seeking out opportunities, either to work on a show that's not within. So for me personally, I came from a theatre background. I was mainly working on theatre, theatre shows beforehand, and I had not had any experience working in circus. So if I was to sort of, tread the path again, I would have sought out opportunities to either listen to show calls for, shows that were touring in town, or reach out to stage managers or people that I know on those shows to see if I could, come and sit backstage, or, even just to go and watch the shows to get an idea of the scale. It's obviously better if you can listen to the show call. And then to improve the skills, I think something that I felt was a little looked over in my, when I was at university, was actually score reading and calling to music. For me, I felt like I have a sort of a musical background, so it wasn't something I ever struggled with before. However, for some stage managers who have only worked theatre shows, who are looking to perhaps move into dance or ballet or circus, making sure that you can count and call to a score is a really big skill, and that there's multiple resources online that you can go to practice those skills and to learn those skills if you haven't done it before. It's a really big one.
Yeah.
I think something that's interesting that you referenced earlier about the deficit in education for in automation. So for operators, or for those who perhaps have more of a technical mind but haven't operated, vice versa, it can be applied to stage management too. Because what sort of theatre school has a fully automated fly system where you can learn about winches, where you can learn about how they work? Because again, going back to calling and learning how to improve your calling skills is understanding how those things work. So when you say go, what's the time difference between the winch moving and seeing an artist moving, or learning where to put the go so that you get the movement at the right time. That's something that, like, 10 years ago when I was at uni, did they even think about that? Like, was that something, if theatre goes down a highly automated path, that really would be an area of learning that is or would be lacking.
And especially as it becomes more automated, then the stage manager, show caller, becomes more the stewardess of the things that are stewardess, steward of those moving parts, because there'll be less and less crew as opposed to the things. So, but then do we think, and this is really more off the top of my head, do you think then that it's like basically kind of two scales of show calling and stage management? There is the theatrical, musical sort of thing where you're calling lighting cues and maybe sound stuff and set movements, and then there's this next level that is found commonly here in Vegas, and in numerous locations like Macau, that is that next level, because you're flying people, the pressure is higher, the comprehension of what you're moving when you're calling is has larger ramifications than a wrong lighting cue. And then really it's the transition maybe from university through to that first scale, and then how do you then scale up to the bigger project? Well,
you have to start small. You have to start somewhere, which is why theatre is a great place to start. And if that's the trajectory you want to take, then you can work your way up. But I think that being proficient in both, it gives you a greater skill, because it's very rarely, for example, I worked for a ballet company for 3 years. It's very rare that we would be flying an artist, but it did happen. In one of the shows, we needed to fly an artist, and no one had done that there. No one in the company had done that. Had to get an outside rigger in to do that particular cue, and he ran it himself. But you really should have an understanding of like basic rigging and basic automation even at that really basic level, to be able to do something on a much larger level. I think at that point in time, I would have loved to have had those skills, just to be able to understand what the rigger was doing and what it needed to look like, to be able to get an idea of that as a stage manager, so that you can communicate that to the director or whatever, is really beneficial.
But I guess, as you say, getting access to that kind of equipment and resources and education, especially in universities in Australia, is a difficult situation. So a lot of it then becomes your own self-education beyond university, possibly.
It does. And I think you have a responsibility. They kind of tried to say this to us at WAPA I don't think, as a 19-year-old, I don't think it really sunk in, that the best education you can get is the one that you seek out yourself in the industry. And they always say, oh, but the industry is different when you finish WAPA, it's not like this, it's not like this. But that's not a very good thing to tell your students. But on the other hand, I guess what they're trying to encourage you to do is to go and seek out those experiences and that education for yourself. Me as a stage manager personally, I've always believed that we should help build each other up and help each other to get the opportunities. If it wasn't for me passing my CV on to Liz all those years ago, I would never be where I am today, and I'm more than happy to do that for somebody who's coming up beneath me. If that, I'm happy as a stage manager to take the time to explain something to someone who's new. And perhaps that's something that stage managers should also, be willing to do for those that are coming up beneath them, because you're essentially bringing up the next generation of stage managers. And for someone who hasn't had access to, automation systems or, like large scale moving parts, the number of questions they have is insane. And I think most stage managers really, really, really want to learn and really want to, to improve themselves so that they can, go on to do bigger and better things.
Yeah. Yeah. And so who was that for you?
Who was that for me? Well, I think, let's see. At different times, I've always, actually you were one of my biggest mentors. I think you really were. That's Anna Robb, who used to be the GSM at the House of Dancing Water. And here in Vegas, I have a couple of other older stage managers who I really look up to, but that, it took me a little while to seek out those people, because some mentors come in really interesting places and really interesting shapes and sizes. You might meet someone who's more experienced who you're like, I really want to learn from this person, but they're like a closed book, They don't really want to take the time to teach you. They don't really want to take the time to mentor you. The mentoring is a huge part of being able to improve yourself as a stage manager. And I found myself seeking out those people. It's a two-way thing, I think. When I've gone to interviews here, mostly at that point in time, because you're interviewing with the GSM, I've asked myself, is this someone who I can learn from as well? Sometimes if the answer is no, then perhaps that's not really a job I want to work on. And sometimes it can be, you don't feel like you're growing unless you have someone there who can help you as well.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know if you want me to name people specifically.
No, it's not. It's more like that you had one.
Yeah.
And
I just think
you felt supported in your trajectory.
Yeah, definitely.
And is there any is there any particular job or show call or anything that stands out for you thus far, or anything particularly that you've done that you are most proud of?
Definitely learning the show call at the House of Dancing Water. I think after my first day there, I went home and cried, and I said, what am I doing here? This is much bigger than me. I'm not the right person for this job. But I knew that I wanted that opportunity so badly that if I turned it down, I would regret it for the rest of my life. So that for me was a huge challenge. I just had never worked on anything of that scale. It took me about 6 months to feel like I was useful in the company. And then it took I think another 2 months of training to be able to call the show. And we started with the rehearsals and worked our way up. And that was like heart in the mouth moment, calling that show for the first time. But once you've done it, you realize that you can do it. And after then, I have to say, I haven't had a show call that's been as terrifying, but if it wasn't for calling the House of Dancing Water, I wouldn't be able to walk into another show these days and be like, you know what, I can do this. Yeah. That really was the best.
You've set your bar now.
I've set my bar, yeah, sure have.
Have you ever, at the House of Dancing Water or any show here or even previously in Australia, has there ever been any emergency situations sticking out in your mind, and tell us about that?
Working here at Absinthe in Vegas, it's a much smaller scale show. However, some of the acts that we have in the show are quite dangerous, even though, you know, we might not be flying them, you know, 10 meters in the air, but if an artist was to fall, you know, there's still a huge risk of injury there. One that sticks out in my mind is we have two, they're skaters. So a male and female duo, they skate really fast in a circle, and he'll pick her up and he'll swing her, and her head comes within an inch of the floor, and they fell off the stage once during a show. And what was terrifying in that aspect for me is the proximity that the audience are to the stage. So at that point in time, you're not just talking about injury to the artist, but you're potentially talking about injury to the audience as well. To think that, you know, suddenly to bring the audience into the equation is really terrifying for me. You know, we can deal with something that's on stage, that's isolated, but when you bring it out into the audience, it's quite terrifying.
Do you think for emergency situations that contingencies are important and preparation in terms of the small scale to large scale emergency is really important, and tell me why?
Yeah, absolutely, it's important, because when something happens that requires your immediate and absolute attention, if you know what the steps are, you're going to default to doing those steps. You're just going to run through it like clockwork. Rehearsing and memorizing and preparing those steps is also just as important, because you need to be able to default to those steps in that situation without panicking, without overthinking it. You just want to react and just go straight for it. It doesn't matter the size or scale of the show. You should have the emergency response there ready to go.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's so important.
Of all the skills, I think maybe you've answered this question, but I'm going to ask it again. Okay. Of all the skills that you think are required of stage management, what do you think are the two most important?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's two that stick out for me. The first one I'm going to say is the ability to remain calm in a stressful situation. You're really like the glue that's going to hold everything together, and if you fall apart, every other department's going to fall apart. The tricky thing about that is you don't really know how you're going to react in a situation until you're put in it. But you can work on it, I think. And again, like going back to having emergency responses, procedures memorized and on hand is another great way to make sure that you do remain calm in a situation. But when people look to you to be like the commander of the ship, you really have to know what's next. You have to, even if you're mentally falling apart on the inside, just to keep it together on the outside is so important. And then you find your way through any situation. Nothing lasts forever, but to really keep it together and remain calm in a stressful situation is one of the hardest and one of the most important skills a stage manager can have. The second one I think is like, I struggle with this one. It's really hard for me, I feel at least, but to be able to to be personable and to be able to read people, read their emotions and respond to that. So this can be like for, a colleague or an artist or someone who you're dealing with, how their emotions are that day. How would you deal with them if they were angry, if they were sad, if they were like really happy, and being able to change the way that you might deal with someone based on either how they're feeling that day or even culturally, like where they're from. If they're from a different country to you, the way that you approach them, you might need to sort of tailor that to fit them, because not everyone's going to take criticism the same way. Not everyone's going to take notes the same way. Not everyone's going to take, positive reinforcement the same way. Everybody's different. So as a stage manager, being able to sort of manipulate yourself to different people, different cultures is really important as well. And that's something I'm still trying to learn. It's still trying to improve.
It's an important point though, and I think that what is that goal? What's the end goal of that? And I guess the thing is, it's your responsibility to deliver that, whatever that daily deliverable is, which is the show.
Yes.
So the team has to be with you on that, and that's where that skill becomes important.
Yep.
Because if you don't have that synergy with that individual or that group of people, then they're not going to clock in at 5 o'clock and get that show
for
done.
you either. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's something that like I would love to, you know, keep working my way up as a stage manager to perhaps do a creation one day, or to perhaps be a PSM or a GSM at a company somewhere. But until I can kind of nail those soft skills, I wouldn't feel comfortable like working at that senior level, because it's so important and it can seriously make or break a team. It really can. Yeah.
So freelance or full-time?
Right now, freelance.
Like as a preference?
As a preference? Oh, geez. I've been on both sides, and there's pros and cons to both. There really is. It's a tough one. You know, I'm typical stage manager, typical planner, and I worry about everything. So I love the stability of a full-time job. And when I freelance, I found it very difficult, perhaps not knowing where or what my next job would be, and I would always like obsess over it. Something would always come up. So I should really learn just to let things go a little bit more. But that, you know, if I had to pick one, that is very tough. That is very, very tough. You know, also when you're freelancing, the job may be 6 to 8 weeks. Sometimes I can have a little short attention span. So to know that I, you know, just had to give my full for 6 to 8 weeks, and that I'm going to get a change. I think I thrive on change as well. So the beauty of freelance is you have many different projects to work on, but nothing can beat the job stability of a full-time gig,
so you like
which
both?
Is nice. I like both. I'm really torn. I don't know if I could pick one.
Yeah.
I really don't. I think full-time, as long as the job is stimulating and challenging. Yeah.
What do you think about the definitions of stage manager in terms of deputy stage manager and general stage manager and stage... What do you think... Because as you go from country to country, the definition of that role evolves with the place that you're in, not necessarily the titles.
Yeah.
Do you think that's an issue? Do you think that we should be standardising that? What are your thoughts on titles of stage management?
It's a tricky one, because it doesn't just apply to where you're working in the world. I think it also applies on what genre of theatre you're working on. So, for example, musicals, very much structured in that way. We have that structure in circus, though it's a little more fluid. And there isn't necessarily a complete definition between ASM and stage manager, because sometimes you will have an ASM that calls the show. I think it's, for me, the way I wish it worked in the perfect world, regardless of what genre you're working on, is that if you come in as ASM, that there's the ability for you to work your way up, and that goals that are attainable for you are placed in front of you. If you wish to improve, work your way up the ladder, you can. But it shouldn't, you know, these sort of titles shouldn't keep you down either. You know, in the perfect world, everyone would have the opportunity to grow and improve within a role. It is tough, because they are different in no matter what country you're working in. But I think they do have a place, really. An ASM is clearly not going to have the same amount of responsibility as a PSM.
Yeah.
But it's a tricky one.
But do you think that for people who... Often I think people who are recruiting stage managers are not necessarily stage managers themselves.
Yes.
So therefore they're looking at those titles. And for example, the scale of what being an ASM on the House of Dancing Water is completely different than being an ASM on a play in Australia.
Yeah.
Right. So how does then one who is not a stage manager differentiate the skill sets associated with those roles, given the context?
I think show calling is a really big one. Show calling, in majority of the cases, is not something that would lay to an ASM, that would be stage management or above. I think.
I don't know the answer to the question, so I don't expect you.
No, it's interesting, and I never really thought about it before. Sometimes the titles really bother me because sometimes you've been ASMing for years and you're like, I'm ready to take the leap, but people go, but you've only ever been an ASM, you're not ready, or you're not, it's very subjective whether or not you're ready to step up to a stage management position. And you shouldn't be kept down by only having ASM roles on your CV. If somebody, can see in you the skills to step up, they should give you the shot, absolutely. Yep.
If you were given the opportunity to interview for staff for yourself, what would you be looking for?
Oh my gosh, that is really hard. This is something that I've found through interviews that I've been to, and having chatted to people in the industries. Ultimately, you really want someone you can get along with. You don't have to be best friends with them. You don't have to have all the common hobbies and interests or whatever, but you need to feel like you can go to work every day and work with that person. I think that's the most important thing. I think someone who is open and genuine and themselves in an interview, so that you kind of get a sense of what they're like as a person, is what I would look for if I was interviewing a candidate. It's tricky because, in an interview you're given 10 minutes to get a snapshot of somebody, and you don't know how you're going to feel about them after working with them for 40 hours a week a whole year later. But someone who you can get along with, I think, is one of the biggest things. Yeah.
Gary Vee says, he's an entrepreneur in New York City, it's not about the hiring, it's about the firing.
Oh.
No, because he goes, you can never know with hiring if you're getting the right person. But what you do have to do is, when the person is not right, is be decisive and move forward and go. And know that you stop trying to make a mistake, trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Yes.
Get rid of it and move on and try and find somebody that does. I find that quite good advice.
That it really is good advice. That's something I would struggle with, to hire someone. It's tough. To really get an idea of what someone's like within a few minutes.
Just a couple of things. You swing for shows, so how easy it is to pick up the shows here in Vegas as a swing, and like, do you feel comfortable quickly in the roles that you were given?
Yes and no. I picked them up in, roughly speaking, I could pick up a show in about a week, but that would be at the very basic level. There's more challenges when you swing because you're not always in the theatre. People don't always see you. When you're working on a show that has a cast of over 100, you can't learn everybody's name in a week. So that's what's harder as working as a swing, is that you need to like walk in and do a job, not necessarily knowing everybody or knowing all the details behind things, but you could pick up a track in about a week and run it in a week if you were there full-time for a week. But you're just not going to have the show knowledge that a full-timer would.
And is that intimidating, or like how do you?
I enjoy the challenge. I enjoy the challenge. I like the 3 shows that I work on are really interesting because they range from fairly simple to fairly complex, and there's one right in the middle. So it's nice to be challenged sometimes when I go into work, and then it's nice to maybe mentally not be as challenged on a show. There's obviously still things that you need to be vigilant of as an on-caller, or when you're calling the show, or when you're running a track. But I like the variety in my day, in my week as well.
Do you think that it's interesting because you work now internationally, so you've had a broad scope of different kinds of routines of life, and a lot of Australians tend to be quite open and adaptable to those aspects of those lifestyles. Do you now have an idea about where you want to be career-wise in 10 years and location-wise in 10 years?
That is really difficult. I almost think about this every day. I swear to God. I love stage managing so much, but I'm not sure it's a forever career for me. I think that at some point in time, I'm gonna have to have an 8 p.m. bedtime. You know, I can't stay up until midnight all the time. So I'm looking for, you know, but currently it still really interests me. I'm super into it. I love my job so much. I want to keep pursuing it. I want to work on more shows. I want to get more experience under my belt. But will I still be stage managing in 10 years' time? I think probably, perhaps not. Something like company management really interests me, as well as I dabbled a little bit back in Australia in venue management, and that's something that interests me as well. So I think as a long-term goal, I probably would start moving towards something like that. And in terms of where would I be in 10 years, most obvious answer would probably be in Australia, but honestly, I don't even know where I'll be in 2 days' time, let alone in 10 years. I would like to go back to Australia at some point in time, but if an opportunity came up somewhere else, I'm sure I'd love to take that up as well.
And if you were to become a parent, do you think that complexity of what you do for a living will also be affected?
Yes, absolutely. Particularly because my husband doesn't work in the industry. We work completely different hours. That might work here in Vegas. Like if if I looked after a child during the day and he came home and I went, to work in the theatre in the evening, that might work. But that only works in Vegas or maybe New York. That doesn't work in, many other cities. That's a sort of bridge I would have to cross if I ever came to it. It's a tough one. I would hate to have to stop working, to be a stay-at-home mom. I don't think that's something I really want to do, but I would have to find a way to perhaps maybe shift my career at that point so that I can keep working.
I think it's certainly quite a challenge for a lot of women who might want both of those things in their lives, to try and find the ideal balance for that. And I don't think the industry necessarily supports that.
Yeah.
Just by its mere nature, not out of lack of intention, but more of the fact that it's contract work. A stage manager's role is full gas for however many hours a day that is required, and split focus for somebody like that, which is a shame, and I'd like to see it change, but like you said, I think there's certain locations around the world where that's possible, but a lot of people, when they choose to have children, start to change their career, which is a shame, because I think that's when the seniority and the ability for people to be those mentors you were talking about and stuff then cease to be around.
That's so true. Like I said before, I would love to perhaps be a GSM somewhere one day, but would I still be working and be able to get to that point if I stopped to have a kid? Because if I was honest, I would have to stop to have a kid. I think that's not something that I can really see working here. It's really tough, and it's such a shame. It's really unfortunate.
So I think, for people who may be entering the industry, it is something that if parenting is a part of definitely their wanted trajectory in life, they have to think about when and where and how in combination with a stage management career, if that's going to be part of it. Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that you want to take into account for sure.
So of all of the genres of entertainment that you've been involved in, do you hold one that is your favourite?
It's going to have to be circus, I think, because even after working at the House of Dance and Water for 2 years, as well as working on a few different circus shows here in Vegas, I still feel like I have so much left to learn. And I love the fact that there's a big, learning curve out there for me, that there's still things that I find interesting that I go, I haven't done that act before, like that, something else you can add to your belt. I loved working at the ballet company when I was at the West Australian Ballet. That was a genre of theatre I never thought I would enjoy, but after the first show, when I was asked to work there, I started there as an ASM, I thought, I'm not going to enjoy this, I'll just do one season and then for the money or whatever, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I didn't think that that would be possible. And then to go and work in a circus show and to fall in love with that all over again, because I think that has an element of like the physical nature of like dance, but then it also has the theatrical nature. You know, they have things like clowns and characterizations and stuff like that. It kind of pulls on both of, you know, theatre and dance, which I really loved. Yeah, for me, it's the most interesting, and I love it the most because there's still so much of it that I haven't done that I want to do.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's good. So in that career trajectory, is there any defining moments where you felt like either a person or a situation where you really felt that you learnt, scaled, like what was your biggest key learning moment? So maybe it's not about learning the show called The House of Dancing Water or an accident in a situation. It could be an accident situation, but like, is there anything that you go, I was different after that happened, or I did whatever, out of all those situations. Yeah.
You know what it was? It was one of those, what did we do? Those like emergency drills that we did at house, and I think it was the first time I was running it as a B1 North, which means that you're basically the second in charge on the ring beneath the show caller. So you take care of everything that happens backstage. That was the very first time I did it. I was still so green and I basically messed it up. I mean, luckily in that case, it was just a drill. And you were saying to me afterwards, you know, you have to think of, it goes back to the emergency procedures and having them there right fresh in your memory when something happens. That was a really pivotal moment for me where I realized, like, no, you need to take this seriously and you need to like make sure that you've memorized all the steps that you need to be the best responder you could be in that situation. And luckily that we rehearsed stuff like that regularly at house, so I had the opportunity to improve from there on. But you know, that working on a show the scale of house wasn't a cakewalk. It was really hard. It involved going home and putting in the effort in my own private time to make sure that I learnt those things, not just for emergency response, but for when it came to the show call, for when it came to running rehearsals even. That was a pivotal moment for me to be like, all right, no, you really got to put your big girl pants on now and and actually bring it to the table, because otherwise you're not going to be a strong member of the team.
Yeah, I think that most of my learning curves have been through mistakes or issues that I've had. And that moment where you feel, oh, I'm not prepared for that.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not able to deal with the situation, and then you have to take certain actions to be better at that situation.
You know what it was? This is terrible paraphrasing because I'm sure I can't remember it exactly, but as the B1 North, if you had to step up and command the situation, and you said to me, when it came down to the response, you were just another worker bee. You were just there. You weren't the one stepping up and taking control of the situation. You responded in the way that, you know, like somebody else running one of the other tracks would have done. Like, you know, how can I phrase that better? I can't remember exactly what you said, but it really...
As the show caller becomes a secondary...
Yeah, right? Yeah. So, like, in that situation, you have to step up. You can't just, you realize, I'm sure I'm not going to remember this now, because you had, like, your list of, like, jobs that you had to do as different tracks, right? Like, go and get the I can't remember what they're called. Go and get the first aid kit, go and get the whatever. And like, instead of like delegating, I went to go and do those things, which was at that point in time realizing, no, you're bigger than just the person who's going to get the first aid kit. You need to be the one to direct and control the situation so that it doesn't get out of hand. You know, that was pretty big.
Yeah.
But I had never done something of that scale before, so I think that was really
But the good thing about that is that because it's at that large scale, anything back from that becomes...
It really doesn't scare me at all. It's not that I don't find it a challenge, it's just that I know that I've done something harder, and I know that I can do it. I know that I can do it, so
then I guess the other question then is, should that also be an aspect of the education of stage management.
Yes, challenging yourself should be something that you do. You know, I can think of a situation where we had a stage manager calling a show, and for whatever reason, the cues were run the wrong way. She called something in the wrong order, and we broke some glass on stage. And instead of getting her to step up to that situation and fix it, they took her off the show. I mean, she'll never have the chance to go back and repeat that and like bring herself to the table to be like, I can do this and I can fix mistakes that I've made and I can learn from it as well. I think that's a big mistake. You know, you need to challenge yourself or you're never going to grow.
And you need to be given the space to do that.
You need to be given the space to it. And everyone learns at a different pace and everyone's, you know, skills lie in different areas. But if you back away from a challenge, you'll never bring yourself to it and you'll never overcome it. And then you'll never improve for next time. Or to know that if something bigger comes next time, then you can do it, you know.
Do you feel the expectation is with stage management with regards to any other elements of the production, that you need to be on top of your game, that there is no if you've been hired to be a stage manager, there's not really that learning curve where you're like, oh sorry, I don't know that. Like for me, I feel like a lot of the time a stage manager has to be at the top.
They do, but also a good stage manager knows to admit when they don't know something.
Exactly.
Or knows to admit when they should ask for help. I never had all the answers to everything at house, but I knew who to go to get the right answer. And that's really important. I think there's a lot of, you know, stage managers put on a pedestal, they're the god, they run everything, and sort of, you know, they don't need to be like that. They actually need to be able to admit when they're wrong, or need to be able to admit when they don't know something, which is, you know, being humble in that way is just as important as, you know, being the boss.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Anything else you want to tell us?
I don't know.
I think that's great.
I'm sorry if I'm a bit waffly.
No,
you can just edit it together.